Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I used to spend most of my summers bouldering with a small group of friends. The kind of summers where time felt slow, and the only thing that mattered was the next climb and whether your fingers would hold. The forest we went to was big, the kind that stretched on for miles without any clear edges, and it sat about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. That distance was just far enough that driving back and forth every day felt like a waste, so after a while we started camping out there. We were not hardcore survival types or anything like that. We had decent tents, cheap camping chairs, a small fire pit, and enough food to last a few days. It was simple and it felt safe because we were always together. The camping spot was not official. It was just a clearing we found after hiking a bit off the main trail, far enough that we would not be bothered, but close enough that we could reach the boulders without much effort. The forest around it was thick. Tall trees packed close together, branches tangled high up, and very little light once the sun went down. During the day it felt calm and quiet. At night it felt like the forest pressed in from all sides, like the darkness had weight to it. On what I think was our third or fourth trip out there, something small but strange happened. One of my friends had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack outside her tent. At least, that is what we all remembered. We were tired that night, hands raw, bodies sore, and we did not do everything perfectly. In the morning, when we started packing up, her gear was not where it should have been. We found her boots a bit away from the tent, along with a few pieces of clothing. Her chalk bag had been emptied, the white powder scattered in the dirt like someone had shaken it out. The rest of her stuff was gone. At the time, none of us wanted to think too hard about it. We went over the obvious ideas. Maybe she left it by the boulders. Maybe an animal dragged parts of it away. Maybe we were just misremembering where things were placed. The forest was full of animals, and the idea that something had taken an interest in sweaty clothes and chalk did not feel impossible. It sounds stupid now, but back then it felt easier to accept that than to think someone had been close to our tents while we slept. We laughed it off, packed up, and went home. That was it, or at least we told ourselves it was. A year passed. Life went on. We talked about other trips, other climbs, but we kept coming back to that same forest because it was familiar, and because nothing else had ever happened there. When we returned the next summer, everything felt the same at first. Same drive, same dirt road, same hike into the trees. We set up camp in the same clearing, placed the tents in roughly the same spots, and spent the day climbing until our arms were dead. That night, after we ate, we sat by the fire and did nothing special. Just sitting, staring into the flames, feeling that calm tiredness you only get after being outside all day. The forest beyond the firelight was completely black. The trees swallowed everything. The fire made a small circle of safety and the rest felt like it did not exist. At some point, I needed to step away from the camp to take a piss. I grabbed a headlamp but did not turn it on because the moon was out and my eyes were already adjusted to the dark. I walked a short distance, just far enough to have some privacy, staying within sight of the fire through the trees. I remember feeling slightly exposed but not scared. It was a feeling I had many times before. As I moved a bit farther, something caught my eye. A shape on the ground that did not fit. At first my brain tried to ignore it, like when you think you see something but tell yourself it is just a stump or a rock. Then it moved slightly, just enough to break that lie. I stopped walking. My body went tight in that quiet way it does when fear hits before thought. There was a person laying flat on their stomach, facing directly toward our campsite. They were covered head to toe in a ghillie suit, the kind made to blend into leaves and dirt. Even in the low light, I could tell what it was. The shape was wrong for anything else. the outline of a human body pressed into the ground, still and deliberate. They were close enough that they had been there for a while, watching. For a few seconds, everything froze. I could feel my heart beating in my ears. My hands felt weak and cold. I realized how quiet it was, how even the usual forest sounds seemed to have dropped away. Then, the person moved their head slightly and I knew, without any doubt, that they had seen me. There was no confusion in that moment. We both understood what had happened. They did not hesitate. They pushed up from the ground and ran. Not in a panicked way, but fast and practiced, disappearing into the trees almost instantly. The forest swallowed them like it had never held anything at all. I stood there alone, staring into the darkness where they had been. I went back to camp shaking. My legs felt wrong, like they did not belong to me. The fire looked smaller than before. The clearing felt exposed in a way it never had. We packed up as soon as we could, not caring about doing it neatly, and not caring about sleep. The drive home felt endless. Every shadow on the road felt like it was watching us pass. In the days after, the memory of the missing gear from the year before came back in a way it never had. The scattered chalk. The boots moved from where they should have been. The feeling that something had been off even then. It was impossible not to connect the two events, even if we could not prove they were related. Someone had been out there. Someone had known where we camped. Someone had felt comfortable enough to get close, to touch our things, to watch us while we slept. The most unsettling part was not the fear of what could have happened, but the realization of how normal everything had seemed. How easily we had explained things away. How quiet the forest had been while someone lay there, hidden, paying attention to us. We never went back to that spot. Not even during the day. Not even just to look. The forest is still there, and the boulders are still there, and I am sure people still climb them. But for me, that place is finished. Whenever I think about camping now, I think about how thin the line is between being alone and being watched, and how the dark does not need anything supernatural to be dangerous. Sometimes all it takes is a person who should not be there, laying still, waiting. We weren't hiking so much as car camping, the kind where you drive until the road barely deserves to be called a road anymore, and then you stop because it feels far enough. This was BLM land in Colorado, south of Gypsum, the kind of place where the map turns into vague green shapes and thin gray lines. We drove for an hour and a half down a Forest Service road, dust pouring up behind us, rocks snapping under the tires, trees closing in tighter the farther we went. No houses, no signs of life, no cell service. Just the steady hum of engines and the feeling of being slowly erased from the rest of the world. What stuck with me even then was how open it felt. From our campsite, you could see for a long way in every direction. At night, headlights on the road would show up as tiny moving stars, and you could hear a car from miles away. There was no way for someone to just appear without us noticing. That detail used to comfort me. Now it does the opposite. We had 3 cars and 8 people. 3 guys, 5 girls. We picked a flat spot just off the road, far enough to feel private, but close enough to feel safe. The cars were parked about 30 yards away from where we set up the fire and tents. Close enough to see, far enough that the light and heat from the fire didn't hit them directly. We cooked dinner as the sun dropped behind the trees, the sky going from pale blue to orange to that deep cold purple that always makes the mountains feel heavier. Everything was normal. Boring even. We ate, laughed, cleaned up. The kind of night you forget unless something bad happens later. As it started getting dark, we decided to grab a few things from the cars before turning in. Headlamps went on. The fire crackled behind us, and we walked back toward the vehicles without any sense of urgency. I noticed the sound first. A faint hissing that didn't belong to the wind. At first it didn't register as danger. It took a second for my brain to catch up, for the sound to connect to what I was seeing. One tire sagging low. The rubber folded in on itself at the bottom. Then another. Then another. The front right tire on all 3 cars was flat. For a few seconds, no one reacted the way you'd expect. It felt like a joke that hadn't landed yet. People laughed nervously, shrugged, looked around like the punchline was hiding in the trees. That feeling died fast. Headlamps moved closer, light sweeping over the rubber. Each tire had the same clean slice in the sidewall, in almost the exact same spot. Not a nail, not a rock, a deliberate cut. That was when the panic hit. It wasn't loud at first. It was physical, tight chests, shaky hands, people pacing without knowing where they were going. The realization settled in all at once that someone had been there with us. Close enough to do this quietly. Close enough to know which cars were ours. Close enough to walk away without being seen. What made it worse was the math of it. 3 cars, 3 tires, same location, same angle. It took time. Whoever did it didn't rush. They stood there working, while we cooked dinner and talked and laughed by the fire. That thought made my stomach twist. I remember scanning the tree line, expecting movement, expecting eyes reflecting back at me. There was nothing, just darkness and the steady sound of wind through branches. The cars hadn't been parked far away. 30 yards. A short walk. The idea that none of us heard anything felt impossible, and yet it made sense too. A gentle hiss gets swallowed by the forest. Nature is loud in its own quiet way. Crickets, wind, the fire popping. A box cutter through rubber doesn't announce itself. One of the guys had a gun. I had never been so relieved and so terrified at the same time. While the rest of us moved on instinct, grabbing spares and jacks, he stood back, scanning the area, turning slowly, watching the road, the trees, the dark gaps between them. The donuts went on fast, faster than I thought possible. Hands moved without much thought. Nobody joked anymore. Nobody complained. Every sound felt sharp, like it might be the one that mattered. I remember thinking about how exposed we were. How if someone wanted to do more than damage tires, they already had the advantage. We were in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service, no quick escape. The fire that had felt warm and friendly minutes earlier now felt like a beacon. As soon as the cars were drivable, we left. No one suggested staying. No one argued. We packed nothing properly. Tents were half stuffed, gear thrown wherever it fit. Headlights cut through the trees as we pulled out, the road ahead looking narrower and darker than it had on the way in. The drive back felt endless. Every turn made me tense. Every set of headlights in the distance made my heart jump, until I could tell they were moving away, not toward us. When we finally hit the highway and phones came back to life, the relief was overwhelming. We called the cops and the ranger, gave them the road name, the coordinates, everything we could remember. There wasn't much they could do. It was too remote, too late, too empty. We were told it was good we had protection and that we should be careful out there. The logical explanations don't help. It wasn't private land. It wasn't one of us. The guys were together the whole time, cooking, and the cuts were too precise, too identical. Nothing on the road could have done that. I've gone over it 1,000 times, trying to find a version that feels less threatening. There isn't one. What stays with me isn't just the act itself, but the intent behind it. Someone chose to cripple our cars instead of slashing all the tires or doing something louder. Someone chose a method that would strand us but not immediately alert us. Someone watched and waited and left without a trace. I still think about how close they had to be. How they probably heard us talking. How they might have been standing just beyond the reach of the firelight, watching us eat dinner like nothing was wrong. That thought makes my skin crawl, in a way nothing else ever has. I have nightmares about it sometimes. Not dramatic ones. Just quiet dreams where I'm back at that campsite, the fire burning low, the forest pressing in. And I know something is wrong, but I don't know what yet. I wake up with that same tight feeling in my chest, the same sick certainty that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just waits, does what it came to do, and disappears, leaving you to deal with the fear long after it's gone. I was younger then, still stuck in that phase where curiosity felt like courage, and every bad idea felt harmless, as long as it came with a good story afterward. A couple of my buddies had been talking for weeks about an abandoned mansion somewhere near the trails by Meadowdale Beach. They swore it was real. Big place, old money, boarded windows. The kind of house people slow down to stare at even while pretending they aren't. They also said the neighbors didn't like anyone snooping around, and would call the cops the moment they saw someone they didn't recognize. That detail alone should have been enough to kill the idea, but instead it made it feel more real, more tempting. I didn't want to deal with cops or awkward explanations, so I decided to approach it the smart way, or at least what felt smart at the time. I pulled the address up on my phone, dropped it into my GPS, and noticed how close it looked to the trail system. The trail wasn't dangerous or remote in any extreme sense. Families walked it. Joggers passed through. I told myself it was safe. I told myself I'd just slip off the trail, cut through the woods, take a look, and leave. Once I actually stepped off the trail, everything changed faster than I expected. The ground felt different almost immediately, softer in some places, uneven in others. The sound of the trail faded behind me in a way that felt wrong, like someone slowly turning down the volume on the world. My phone kept buzzing with small GPS adjustments, the arrow spinning slightly as I moved. I followed it, ducking under branches, pushing through brush that grabbed at my clothes. The woods weren't thick enough to feel lost, but they were thick enough to make it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. I kept checking behind me, not because I thought I was being followed, but because it felt unnatural not to. The air smelled damp, like rotting leaves and old rain. Every snap of a twig made my shoulders tense. I kept reminding myself it was the middle of the day, 1 or 2 in the afternoon. Sunlight filtered down through the trees in broken patches, lighting up moss and fallen logs. Nothing about it should have felt scary. After maybe half an hour of slow progress, I stepped out onto something that made me stop cold. It was a paved road. Not cracked asphalt or a worn trail, but actual pavement, dark and smooth, cutting through the woods like it didn't belong there. It ran left and right, disappearing behind trees in both directions. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't on my map. It didn't look maintained. But it also didn't look abandoned enough to be forgotten. I never figured out what it was for. I didn't follow it. Something about it felt wrong. Like it was a line I wasn't supposed to cross. I stepped over it instead and started climbing the steep hill on the other side. Halfway up, I thought I heard a car. The sound came quick and then vanished, but it was enough. My chest tightened and my brain jumped straight to the idea of someone seeing me, someone wondering why a random guy was crawling out of the woods near a private road. I climbed faster, slipping once, grabbing at dirt and roots to pull myself up. When I reached the top, I flattened myself instinctively and looked out through the trees. That's when I saw the tents. There were a lot of them. Not 1 or 2, but a whole cluster, maybe a dozen or more, spread out in a rough clearing. Different colors, different sizes. Some looked old and sun-faded. Others looked newer, cleaner. There were tarps tied between trees, piles of bags. What looked like makeshift furniture built from scrap wood. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't neat either. It looked lived in. I stayed perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't something I had prepared for. I wasn't expecting anyone to be out here, especially not this far from the trail. This wasn't a spot you just wandered into by accident. Whoever set this up had done it on purpose. They had chosen this place. The worst part was the silence. No voices, no movement. Nothing obvious to show whether anyone was there or not. It was the middle of the day, which made it even more unsettling. People should have been around. Someone should have been moving. The idea that they could all be there, just out of sight, made my skin crawl. I imagined eyes behind fabric, someone noticing the slight movement of branches where I was hiding, I slowly backed away, careful with every step, trying not to make a sound. My foot slipped on loose dirt and my stomach dropped, but nothing happened. No reaction, no noise. I didn't wait to see if my luck would hold. Once I had enough distance, I turned and moved faster, not running, but close to it. I didn't look back. Getting out of the woods felt like waking up from a bad dream. The trail reappeared, solid and familiar. The sounds of distant footsteps and birds came back. I checked myself over like I had just escaped something physical, my hands shaking slightly as I wiped dirt off my palms. I walked straight to my car and sat there for a long time before turning the key. I didn't tell the story the way it actually happened at first. I left parts out. I joked about it. But the image of those tents stuck with me. Not because anything chased me or confronted me, but because I had stumbled into a place I clearly wasn't meant to see. It was a reminder that even near familiar places, there are pockets of the world operating by different rules. I did eventually find the mansion, on a different day, taking a more normal route. It was exactly what I had been told. Big, empty, decaying in slow motion. Broken windows peeling paint. The kind of place that felt abandoned in a way that made sense. I walked around it briefly and left without incident. But the mansion never bothered me the way the woods did. The house was just a house. The tents were something else. They were proof that curiosity doesn't always lead to stories worth telling. And that sometimes the scariest moments come from realizing how close you are to other lives you know nothing about. I never went off that trail again. I didn't need to learn that lesson twice. It was a bit later than I planned, but I did end up getting there. The drive itself felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because of how empty everything became once I left the main road. Trees closed in, the air got cooler, and the sound of my tires on gravel felt too loud. I remember checking my mirrors more than once, half expecting headlights that never appeared. I parked farther away than my friends ever had, mostly out of habit, and walked the rest of the way up. I used to have pictures of the inside of the place. I know I did. They were on an old hard drive or a phone that died years ago. Somewhere between 3 or 4 computers they vanished. The only image I still have is of the driveway, long and curved, disappearing uphill between thick trees. Even that photo feels wrong now, like it doesn't show how narrow the space actually felt when I stood there in person. My friends had talked about this mansion for years. They treated it like a joke at first, something to do when they were bored. But the more they went back, the more details they added. They described how big it was, how strange the layout felt, how easy it was to lose track of where you were. Hearing about it so many times made it feel familiar before I ever saw it, and that probably made me too confident. I avoided the nearby camp they warned me about and followed a rough path through the trees. When the mansion finally came into view, it looked bigger than I expected. Not wide, but tall, rising in layers. It didn't look abandoned in the dramatic way people imagine. No broken windows from the outside, no obvious damage. It looked like something people had just stopped using and walked away from without explanation. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Dust hung in the light that came through the windows, and every step echoed longer than it should have. The architecture made no sense. Every staircase was a spiral, tight and curved, forcing you to turn slowly as you climbed. There were 4, maybe 5 stories, and each level felt slightly different, like it had been added at a different time by someone with a different idea of what the house should be. The hallways were the worst part. They bent and looped in ways that messed with my sense of direction. More than once, I turned down what felt like a new passage and ended up back somewhere I recognized. I remember stopping at one point and standing still, trying to picture the layout in my head, and realizing I couldn't. The house refused to become a map. The master bedroom was off to the left of the main entryway, up another spiral staircase. It was massive, far larger than anything else I'd seen. There was a huge closet, a bathroom bigger than some apartments, a deck that looked out over the trees, and the bedroom itself felt like it could swallow sound. The place was wrecked, but not in the careless way teenagers destroy things. Furniture was overturned, drawers pulled out, and there were marks on the walls that looked like something heavy had been dragged or thrown. It felt like the aftermath of something intense, something that had ended suddenly. In the middle of that room was another spiral staircase, narrower than the others. It led up to a small study that felt cut off from the rest of the house. The ceiling was low, the windows narrow. From up there, I could see parts of the property I hadn't noticed before. There was an elevator shaft in that room too. The doors were closed, and no matter what I did, they wouldn't open. Even if they had, I know I wouldn't have stepped inside. The idea of being stuck between floors in that house made my chest tighten. I stayed up there longer than I realized, just looking out the windows and trying to take it all in. Later, I found out that while I was doing that, someone nearby had seen movement and called the police. At the time, I had no idea. I went back down and kept exploring, moving slower now, feeling more tired and more aware of how alone I was. After another 15 or 20 minutes, I reached the point where the only place left to go was down. The staircase led into a lower level with no windows at all. The air felt colder there. As I turned a corner, the darkness became complete, like the light behind me had been swallowed. I stopped without thinking. My body reacted before my brain did. Something about that space felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not dangerous in a dramatic sense, just deeply unsettling, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I went back toward the main entryway, moving faster now, trying not to look into side rooms. When I reached the front, I saw flashing lights through the windows. The police were outside, not inside yet. I stayed hidden for a few minutes, my heart pounding, considering whether to wait them out. The thought of being alone in that house, while they stood just outside, felt worse than being caught. The house felt like it was pressing in on me, like the walls were listening. I made myself visible and went out. They searched me, found what I had on me, and told me not to come back. Their reaction surprised me. There was no anger, just disbelief. One of them looked genuinely unsettled by the place. He made it clear he would never have gone inside, unless his job required it. Hearing that from someone who had seen far worse than I ever had stuck with me. I left without looking back. The walk to my car felt longer than the walk in. Once I was driving away. The trees opened up again, and the normal sounds of the road slowly returned. I expected to feel relief, but instead I felt hollow, like I'd left something unfinished behind me. For a long time after, I tried to remember the details clearly enough to write about them. The more time passed, the more the house blurred in my memory, except for certain feelings. The way the staircases forced you to turn in circles. The way familiar hallways reappeared when they shouldn't have. The sudden, heavy darkness below ground. I realized later that what scared me wasn't the idea of something supernatural. It was the sense that the place had been designed without care for the people inside it. Like it didn't care whether you found your way out or not. I never went back. I thought about it, especially after people showed interest and asked for more details, but I didn't. The pictures are gone, and maybe that's for the best. What stays with me is the knowledge that places like that exist, built by someone, used by someone, and then left behind with no explanation. Nothing chased me. Nothing spoke. Nothing dramatic happened. And that's exactly why it still bothers me. The house didn't need to do anything. It was enough to stand there, empty and silent, waiting for someone curious enough to step inside and feel how small they really were. I don't remember when I first heard about the house. It was always just there in my memory, like a landmark you don't think about until someone points at it and tells you something is wrong with it. I grew up there, or at least I spent a big part of my childhood inside those walls, but the stories about what came before us didn't reach me until much later. Even now, the details don't line up cleanly. I know a little, but most of it contradicts itself, and the rest feels smudged, like something you read too fast and try to remember years later. From what I've been able to piece together, the original owner was a big builder in the area, the kind of guy whose name shows up on plaques and permits. The house wasn't just another project for him. It was personal. People told me he designed it himself, room by room, like he was proving something. It was massive, almost ridiculous for a family home. High ceilings everywhere, long hallways that curved instead of running straight, staircases that didn't need to be as wide as they were. Even as a kid, it felt like too much house for normal life. At some point, he sold it, and later it ended up with a man who owned a large local car dealership. That part is consistent across every version I've heard. After that, things get messy. Everyone agrees he had money, at least for a while, and that he liked showing it. Expensive cars, loud parties, big gestures. People also agree he used a lot of coke and had a temper that could flip without warning. The house started to change then, not in structure, but in feeling. The stories about his family are the ones that stick with me. I was told the marriage fell apart slowly, and then all at once. The kids took the brunt of it. One version says the mom would hide out in the master bedroom with the younger kids when he was in a mood, putting on movies to drown him out. When I later went back into that room as a teenager, that detail hit me hard. There were old kids' DVDs still there, shoved into a drawer like they'd been abandoned mid-use. I remember sequels from The Land Before Time, scratched and cloudy. The TV in that room had been smashed, not tipped over, but punched inward, the screen spider-webbed and caved. The mattress had a deep X cut into it, straight lines, done with force, not some random tear. After that, the timeline split. One story says he got arrested, did some time, and bled money while he was inside. Another says the mom filed for divorce, and he couldn't handle the cost of the place on his own. Either way, the math makes sense. Nearly 10,000 square feet, huge utility bills, a mortgage that would crush most people. Add in a collapsing family and a habit that burns cash, and the outcome feels inevitable. The house slipped out of his control. My friends loved that part of the story, the fall. They treated the place like a trophy once it was empty. They were some of the first people to sneak in after it was abandoned, along with one of the guy's sons. They told me about smoking weed upstairs, lighting candles in an old study, not caring where the wax dripped. They left burn marks in the carpet, melted spots that never came out. That alone was enough to make the former owner furious. I heard he still drove by sometimes, still claimed it in his head. According to them, he once showed up with a gun to scare off other kids who were snooping around. When I finally went in alone, it was different from what they described. The house didn't feel frozen. It felt used. They said the kitchen had been clean when they were there, bare counters, empty cabinets. When I opened the kitchen door, a cardboard cutout of Frankenstein stood just behind it, close enough that it almost brushed me when the door swung inward. The counters were filthy, layered with grime, old spills, dust that had settled and been disturbed again. Someone had been there after my friends, maybe many someones. I moved through the house slowly, noticing small changes. A corkboard hung in a back office, half filled with printed reviews from the dealership. Mostly positive, carefully arranged. It felt like proof that the man had cared, at least once. Upstairs in a game room, I found a behavioral report with one of the sons' names on it. Folded, creased, read too many times. I didn't take anything. I didn't feel like I was supposed to. The longer I stayed, the more aware I became of how easy it would be to disappear in that place. Rooms that weren't on any logical path. Closets bigger than my childhood bedroom. Windows that looked out over empty property, no neighbors in sight. I kept thinking about how angry the former owner had been about people entering his house. Angry enough to show up armed, angry enough to drive by long after it was gone from him. What scared me wasn't the idea of him suddenly appearing. It was the thought that he might already be there sometimes, using the house the way people use things they can't let go of. Not haunting it, just returning, cleaning one room, trashing another, leaving signs that didn't match anyone else's story. I left before it got dark. I didn't run, but I didn't linger either. Years later, the house was finally sold, gutted, and renovated. New owners, fresh paint, different layout inside. The old damage was covered, not erased. I drove past it recently and felt nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic, just a clear understanding. The house was never scary because of rumors or missing pieces. It was scary because it was a real place shaped by real people losing control of their lives. It wasn't cursed. It was neglected, fought over, and abandoned while still full of evidence. The danger was never imaginary. It was always human, and it was always possible that someone who believed the house was still his could walk through those doors again. That's what stayed with me, and that's why I never went back once it changed hands. When I was younger and a lot dumber, I went to college up in the North Georgia mountains. It was a small school, surrounded by trees, gravel roads, and long stretches of land where you could drive for 10 minutes and not pass another car. Back then, my friends and I used to night hike all the time. We treated it like it was nothing. We would wait until after midnight, park somewhere quiet, and just walk the trails with cheap flashlights, laughing and acting fearless. After doing that enough times, the woods start to feel familiar. Too familiar. You stop respecting how exposed you really are out there. I knew those trails well. I had walked them in daylight, at dusk, and in the dark. I knew where the ground dipped, where the rocks stuck out, where the trees opened up. That false sense of control made me confident to the point of stupidity. So when one night came around with a full moon and perfect weather, I decided to go alone. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't leave a note. This was before cell phones were a normal thing. So once I stepped off the pavement, I was completely on my own. The moonlight was strong enough that the forest looked painted in pale blue. Shadows were long and soft, not sharp. I barely used my flashlight. The trail was flat and easy, maybe a mile loop at most, nothing challenging. I remember thinking how calm everything felt. No wind, no clouds, no noise except insects and my own footsteps. I was a little high, not enough to be sloppy, just enough to feel loose and curious. At the time, it felt like the best possible way to spend an hour. For the first part of the hike, I felt peaceful. The trees felt tall but not threatening. The air smelled clean, damp, like leaves and dirt. I remember stopping once just to stand there and let my eyes adjust, watching the shapes of branches against the sky. It didn't feel scary at all. It felt private, like I had the woods to myself. That changed without warning. I didn't hear anything at first. It started as a physical feeling, like something had shifted behind my ribs. A tightness in my stomach, sudden and cold. It was the kind of feeling you get when you realize you've forgotten something important, except I couldn't name what it was. A fraction of a second later, I heard the sound. It was a man crying. The sound came from ahead of me, off to the right of the trail, deeper in the trees. Not close, but not far enough to feel distant either. It wasn't quiet. It carried through the woods in a way that made it impossible to ignore. At first, my brain tried to make it make sense. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe someone had fallen. Maybe someone was lost. Those thoughts came automatically, because that's what you tell yourself to stay calm. But my body didn't agree. The crying wasn't normal. It wasn't just sobbing. There was something broken about it, like it was spilling out of him without control. It rose and fell, sometimes choking, sometimes stretching thin and high, almost sharp. Underneath it, there was a kind of rambling noise, not words, just sounds tumbling over each other. It felt endless, like he hadn't just started crying, like he had been doing it for a very long time. I froze on the trail. I remember my throat tightening, like my body was physically stopping me from making any noise. I wanted to help, at least that's what my mind told me. That instinct was there, weak but persistent. But something stronger took over, a deep certainty that if I made myself known, I would regret it immediately. The fear wasn't dramatic or panicked yet. It was clean and sharp, a warning. The woods suddenly felt close. Every tree felt like it was leaning in. I became painfully aware of how loud my breathing was, how the gravel under my boots could betray me with one wrong step. The crying continued, steady and raw, and I had the overwhelming sense that it wasn't meant for me, but it would turn toward me if it had a reason. I turned around. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I knew better than that. I stepped back the way I came, slow and careful, placing each foot down like I was diffusing something fragile. The sound followed me, not moving, but staying present, filling my head. My hearing narrowed until it felt like that crying was the only thing left in the world. Every snap of a twig under my foot felt like a gunshot in my chest. I kept imagining the sound changing, getting louder, shifting direction, turning into screaming. My mind kept throwing images at me of a man bursting out of the trees, eyes wide, face streaked with dirt and tears, moving too fast, too wrong. I didn't look back. I was afraid that if I did, I would see something stepping onto the trail behind me. As I moved farther away, the sound finally started to fade. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a radio being turned down. Even then, I didn't relax. I didn't believe I was safe yet. My muscles stayed tight, ready to bolt. When my car finally came into view, I felt weak with relief. I unlocked it, got inside, locked the doors, and sat there shaking. I half expected someone to slam into the side of the car, to appear in the headlights, to force the moment I had been avoiding. Nothing happened. The woods stayed quiet. The panic hit me hard once I started driving. My hands shook on the wheel. My chest felt tight and hot. I made it back to campus and parked, then sat there for a long time, breathing through it, letting the adrenaline drain out of me. I never went back to that trail at night. I never felt bad about leaving that man out there. Whatever he was dealing with, it wasn't something I could fix, and every instinct I had told me I had escaped something real and dangerous. Even now, years later, I still think about how visible I must have been under that bright moon. I think about how one beam of flashlight could have given me away. I don't think about it like a mystery or a story anymore. I think about it as a narrow miss. One decision made without knowing how close I was to something that didn't need ghosts or legends to be terrifying. I go out for walks very late at night fairly often. It's something I started doing a few years ago when my sleep got bad. The town feels different after midnight. Quieter, slower. Like everything is half asleep. I like the empty streets, the way the air feels cooler, the way sounds carry farther. You notice small things you'd never notice in the daytime. A loose sign tapping in the wind. A light flickering in a shop window. Your own footsteps sounding too loud on the pavement. That night started like all the others. I left the house around 1:30 a.m. I didn't rush. I locked the door, checked my phone for the time, and headed down the street. Most of the houses were dark. A few had porch lights on, and one or two TVs glowing through curtains. The town center was dead. No cars, no people, just street lights and long shadows. I walked aimlessly for a while, taking turns without really thinking about it, letting my legs decide where to go. By about 200 a.m. I started heading back the way I came. I was a little tired and the cold was starting to sink in. That's when I noticed the van. It was black, plain, and kind of dull, like it hadn't been washed in a long time. It rolled slowly down the street, not speeding, not stopping either. At first I barely thought about it. Cars passed by all the time, even late at night. I kept walking. A few minutes later I saw it again. Same black van, same slow speed, coming down the same street. I remember thinking it was odd, but I wasn't sure if it was actually the same one. There are a lot of similar vans around, especially work vans. I told myself it was nothing and kept going. Still, I felt myself paying more attention to it than I wanted to. The third time is when my stomach dropped. About 10 minutes later, after I had turned onto another road, the van came into view again. This time it was close enough that I could really look at it. That's when I noticed it had no license plates. No front plate, no back plate. Just empty space where they should have been. The streetlights reflected off the metal, but there were no markings, no logos, nothing to identify it. My pace picked up without me even thinking about it. I didn't run yet, but I walked faster, my footsteps sharper against the ground. I kept glancing over my shoulder. I could hear the van before I saw it again, the low hum of the engine carrying through the quiet street. When it came around this time, it slowed even more. Then it stopped. It stopped right in the middle of the road, a few houses ahead of me. No hazard lights, no turn signal, nothing. Just sitting there, engine running. I froze for a second, my brain trying to catch up with what my body already knew. Every part of me was screaming that this was wrong. I turned around and ran. I didn't look back at first. I just ran the way I had come, my breath loud in my ears, my legs burning almost immediately. I took the first turn I could, then another, trying to put distance and confusion between me and that van. My shoes slapped against the pavement and I was painfully aware of how exposed I was, how open the streets were with nowhere to hide. I cut through a narrow side street and then into a residential area I didn't know well. The houses were close together, fences lining the yards. I ran into one of them without thinking, ducking behind a wooden fence and crouching down. The fence was old and rough, the wood digging into my palms as I pressed myself against it. I tried to slow my breathing, but my chest felt tight and shaky. I waited there, barely moving. Every sound felt huge, a dog barking somewhere far away, the rustle of leaves, my own heartbeat pounding in my head. After what felt like forever, I saw headlights sweep across the street beyond the fence. The black van rolled past slowly, just like before, as if it was searching. It didn't stop this time. It went on, turned the corner, and disappeared. I stayed there anyway. I didn't trust that it was gone. My legs were cramping from crouching, but I didn't move. I kept listening, straining for any sign of the engine coming back. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The cold sank deeper into my clothes, and my sweat started to chill on my skin. Finally, after about 20 minutes, I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I waited a little longer, then slipped out of the yard and moved as quietly as I could. I didn't walk on the main roads. I stuck to side streets, cutting through alleys and back paths I barely knew. I stopped at every corner and listened before crossing. I didn't see the van again, but that didn't calm me. I kept expecting it to appear out of nowhere. When I finally reached my street, I didn't slow down. I ran straight to my house. I didn't bother with the front door. I went around back and climbed through my bedroom window, knocking things over in my rush. Once I was inside, I locked everything. The window, the door, every lock I could reach. I stood there in the dark for a long time just listening. Nothing happened after that. No knock at the door. No engine outside. The rest of the night passed quietly. But I didn't sleep. Every sound made me tense up. When morning finally came, the normal daylight felt strange and unreal, like it didn't belong. In the days after, I kept replaying it in my head. I thought about how often that van must have passed me before I really noticed. I thought about how easily I could have frozen instead of running. I checked the streets more carefully when I went out, even during the day. I stopped going for walks at night altogether. Nothing like that has happened since. I never saw the van again. But I still think about it sometimes, especially when I'm awake late and the town goes quiet. It wasn't a ghost or anything supernatural. It was just people in a vehicle, doing something they didn't want seen. That's what scares me the most. It was real. It was deliberate. And if I had made one wrong move, the ending could have been very different. This happened to me a few years ago. Back when I was a student at UC Santa Cruz, I was really into running at the time. It was how I cleared my head after classes, and the campus made it easy. The whole place sits inside a redwood forest, and there are trails everywhere. Some are wide and busy, others feel like they disappear straight into the woods. I had my usual routes memorized, and I rarely felt unsafe because there were almost always other runners, hikers, or students around. That day was different from the start. I left later than I normally did. Classes ran long, and by the time I changed and headed out, the sun was already lower than I liked. I told myself it was fine. I knew the trail well. I'd run it dozens of times. I figured I'd just go to my usual checkpoint and turn around. About 15 minutes in, the forest felt quieter than usual. The redwoods blocked a lot of light, and everything had that dim green and brown look, like the day was already ending even though the sun wasn't fully down yet. My footsteps were loud against the dirt, and my breathing felt too noticeable. I remember thinking it was strange that I hadn't passed anyone yet. No bikers, no dog walkers, no other runners. Just trees and the narrow trail stretching ahead. That's when I saw him. He was walking in the same direction as me, deeper into the woods. His clothes were dirty and torn, and they hung off him in a way that made it clear he'd been wearing them for a long time. He moved slowly, not like someone exercising or hiking for fun, more like someone with nowhere specific to go. The thing that really stood out was where he was headed. This trail went far, and once it got dark fast. Anyone going that way this late was planning to stay out there. My first instinct was to turn around, but I was already committed to the run in my head. I didn't want to let fear decide things for me. I told myself to keep my distance, pass him quickly, and get to my turnaround point. As I got closer, I felt that tight feeling in my chest that you get when something doesn't sit right, even if you can't explain why. I focused on the trail and tried to act normal as I ran past him. That was when he spoke. He said something that made no sense to me in the moment, something random and out of place. I didn't stop. I didn't look at him. I just answered without thinking and kept running. I remember feeling annoyed more than scared right then, like this was just some strange encounter I'd laugh about later. When he replied, his voice drifted off into quiet muttering behind me, and I felt relieved when the sound of it faded. I kept going until I reached my usual point, a spot where the trail curves and the trees thin out just enough to give you a sense of direction. By then, the light had dropped fast. The forest looked completely different on the way back. Shadows stretched across the path, and the air felt colder. Every sound stood out. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, the distant movement of something I couldn't see. As I ran back, my pace slowed. I knew I'd have to pass the same spot again. I kept scanning the trail ahead, half expecting to see him standing there. When I reached the area where I first passed him, the path was empty. There were no side trails, no clear places where someone could have gone without leaving the path entirely. That made it worse. If he had turned around, I should have seen him. The idea that he might be somewhere off the trail, hidden among the trees, sat heavy in my mind. I was just about to move on when I heard movement from above me. The trail ran along a steep hillside in that section, and the slope climbed sharply into darkness. Then I heard a scream. It was sudden and sharp enough to make me freeze in place. My heart felt like it slammed into my throat. I looked up, but I couldn't see anything at first. It was too dark, and the trees blocked most of the sky. After a moment, I saw movement. A figure was coming down the hill slowly, carefully, like they were exhausted and scared of slipping. When the person reached the trail, I could see it was a girl around my age. She looked shaken, breathing hard, covered in dirt and leaves like she'd been scrambling through the brush. The way she kept looking back up the hill told me everything I needed to know. Something had scared her badly enough to climb straight up that slope. She explained what had happened, how she'd been running earlier and ended up being followed. The description matched the man I had seen. Hearing it from someone else made the whole thing real, in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't just a weird interaction. This was someone actively threatening enough to chase her off the trail. She'd hidden up there, alone, waiting, because she was too scared to come back down by herself. Standing there in the dark, surrounded by trees, I suddenly felt how exposed we were. Whoever that man was, he knew the area better than we did. He could have been watching the whole time. The forest felt like it was closing in, every shadow a place someone could be standing without being seen. We didn't waste time. We ran back toward the road together, sticking close, pushing our legs harder than we probably should have. Every sound behind us made my stomach drop. I didn't look back once. I just focused on the path, on getting to the lights and the open space beyond the trees. When we finally reached the road, it felt like crossing into a different world. Cars passed by. Streetlights hummed. The forest ended sharply, like a wall. We slowed down, both breathing hard, both still scanning the darkness behind us. After a quick thank you, we went our separate ways, each heading toward our own place, both of us clearly shaken. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how easily things could have gone wrong. About how many people disappear into places like that, slowly, quietly. Santa Cruz has always had stories about people who come for school and never really leave, who fall through the cracks and end up living in the woods that surround the campus. Whether that man was one of them, or something else, entirely didn't really matter. What mattered was how close I came to being alone out there when things turned dangerous. I never ran on that trail again. Not during the day, not with friends, not ever. Every time I pass that part of campus now, I think about how quickly a normal afternoon turned into something I still remember years later. There was nothing supernatural about it. Just a forest, a stranger, and the realization that sometimes the scariest things are the ones that could really happen. It was one of those nights where the party had burned itself out slowly instead of ending all at once. People drifted away in twos and threes, rides got called, lights dimmed, music turned into background noise. By the time I stepped outside, it was late enough that the city felt like it was holding its breath. The air was cool, the kind that keeps you awake without feeling cold. I decided to walk. I wasn't drunk, just loose and tired in a good way, and the streets looked calm. Streetlights stretched out in long yellow lines. Storefronts were dark, metal gates pulled down, glass reflecting my own movement back at me. At first, the walk felt peaceful. I noticed things I usually missed. The hum of traffic far away, a bus hissing as it knelt at a stop, the echo of my shoes on the sidewalk. My head was still full of music and laughter, and I let my thoughts wander. I liked the feeling of being alone in the city at night, like I was seeing a version of it that didn't belong to anyone else. A block or so in, I became aware of someone behind me. Not because of footsteps exactly, but because of timing. Every time I passed under a streetlight, there was a shadow that stretched a little longer than mine. I didn't think much of it at first. Cities are full of people walking home late. I kept my pace steady and told myself not to be dramatic. Another block went by. The distance closed. I could sense it without turning around. That awareness settled in my chest, light at first, then heavier. I sped up just a bit, not enough to look obvious. The footsteps behind me sped up too. That was when my thoughts stopped drifting and started lining up, one after another, sharp and focused. I crossed the street at the next corner, pretending it was casual, like I had just remembered something or changed my mind about my route. My heart was beating faster now, but I still hadn't looked back. I waited for the sound behind me to fade or continue straight. Instead, I heard the same rhythm, now on the other side of the road. The coincidence sat wrong. My shoulders tightened. Half a block later, I crossed back. This time it was quicker, more decisive. I didn't care if it looked strange. I needed to know. A few seconds passed, and then there it was again. The same presence, the same distance still behind me. There was no mistaking it now. I finally glanced back, just enough to confirm what my body already knew. A man, hood up, hands in his pockets, walking like he had nowhere specific to be, but plenty of time to get there. Fear didn't hit all at once. It came in layers. First the cold realization, then the math. How far was home? How empty the street was. How easy it would be for him to close the gap if he wanted to. I thought about running, but the street ahead was long and open, and I didn't want to turn myself into something that looked like prey. That was when I saw the shopping cart up ahead. It was piled high with bags, old blankets, random bits of metal and plastic that caught the light. Pushing it was a figure hunched forward, moving slow but steady. The relief I felt at seeing another person surprised me with its intensity. I started jogging, not full sprint, just enough to close the distance quickly. My lungs burned a little, and the sound of the cart grew louder, wheels rattling over cracks in the pavement. As I reached the cart, everything spilled out of me at once. The fear, the adrenaline, the decision I had already made. I didn't slow down until I was right beside her. Up close, I could see she was an older black woman, her face lined and alert, eyes sharp even in the dim light. She took in my panic instantly, then shifted her attention past me, down the street. What happened next was fast and unmistakable. She reached into the cart and came up holding a large knife, the blade catching the glow of the street lamp. She raised it just enough to be seen clearly, her posture changing completely. The man behind me stopped. For a brief second, everything froze. The city noise, my breathing, the space between us. Then he turned and walked away quickly, not looking back. His steps losing their casual rhythm as he disappeared into the dark. I stood there shaking, the reality of what had almost happened crashing down on me, now that the threat was gone. My hands felt numb, my legs weak. The woman lowered the knife and put it back into the cart, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She looked at me with something like disbelief, then curiosity. I understood what she was thinking without her having to say it. Of all the people on the street, I had chosen her. I tried to steady my breathing and explain myself in the simplest way possible. I told her I knew he was trouble. I told her I figured even if she had been a man, it was still better odds than being alone. Saying it out loud made it feel more solid, like a choice instead of a gamble. She nodded, still watching the street where the man had vanished. After a moment, she started pushing the cart again, and I fell into step beside her. We walked together for a while, the tension slowly draining from my body. The city didn't feel quite as empty anymore. We talked as we went, about small things, about life, about nothing important. Her voice was calm, grounded. She had the kind of presence that comes from surviving a lot and learning which details matter. After a few blocks, we reached a point where our paths split. My building was closed now, lights visible in the distance. I thanked her, meaning it in a way that went deeper than politeness. She gave me a nod and kept going, cart rattling ahead of her, knife tucked away but clearly never far. I stood there for a moment after she left, listening to the night again. It sounded different now, sharper, more real. When I finally walked the rest of the way home, I didn't enjoy the beauty of the city anymore. I paid attention. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, letting the adrenaline fade. The fear stayed with me for a long time after that, not as panic but as awareness. I understood how quickly a normal night could tilt into something else, how safety can come from the least expected place, and how wrong our assumptions can be about who is dangerous and who is not. I made it home because I trusted my instincts, and because someone who the world usually looks past was ready to protect herself, and a stranger without hesitation. That was the part that stuck with me the most, long after the streets went quiet again.